Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take all that essential source material, the biographies, the interviews, the real deep research, and we hand you the synthesized knowledge.
All those surprising facts and those really satisfying aha moments.
Exactly. Our goal is to make you instantly well-informed, but, without that crushing weight of information overload.
And today we are focusing on, well, what might just be the greatest paradox in the entire history of rock and roll.
I think it is.
We're diving into the life and the rhythm of Charles Robert Watts, Charlie Watts, the indispensable, elegant, and just deeply private drummer of the Rolling Stones.
From 1963 right up until his death in 2021. Okay, so let's unpack that core contrast right away. Because when you think of the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, the whole mythos.
It's chaos.
It's pure chaos. It's sexual license, chemical rebellion, rock and roll swagger, just personified.
And Charlie Watts was, visually and aesthetically, the polar opposite of all of that. He was the quiet, immaculately tailored jazz purist.
And he somehow served as the absolute rhythmic anchor for that famously unruly machine for decades.
Right. And that paradox, how that restraint actually powered the rebellion, that's really the heart of this deep dive.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to look far beyond that simple title, Stones drummer.
Oh, it completely undersells his influence. We want to analyze the specific, granular details of his life that reveal his unique and often contradictory contributions.
So not just as a musician known for his restraint.
No, not at all. But also as a professionally trained graphic designer, a fiercely devoted family man, and really the very embodiment of the anti-rock star.
We're aiming for a full picture of the man who, by choosing not to seek attention, became impossible to ignore.
Exactly.
And the big picture nugget, the thing you have to hold on to as we move through this is this. Watts's deep, almost academic passion was jazz.
He wasn't a rock drummer who, picked up a few R&B licks.
No, he was a devout jazz disciple. He fused that high-level jazz sensibility, that restraint, that focus on swing and texture and timing with the raw, primal energy of, the early rock and R&B scene.
And that sophisticated fusion, that's what created the distinct, instantly recognizable, and I think critically, the truly inimitable sound of the Rolling Stones.
So let's trace the origins of this elegant constant. Charlie Watts was born on the 2nd of June, 1941, in Bloomsbury, London.
And he came from a working-class background that, it really contrasts with the later opulence of his life. His father, Charles Richard Watts, was a lorry driver for the railway.
Right, the London, Midland, and Scottish Railway.
And his mother, Lillian, she was a factory worker.
That working class stability, though, that seems really important. It gave him this grounded perspective that feels like it never really left him.
I think you're right. After the Luftwaffe bombing during World War II, the family was relocated to Wembley, and they lived in a prefab house.
These were those quick-to-assemble homes, right? Very common after the war.
Exactly. And Watts was so young that he later recalled his earliest memories of the war as, and this is a quote, something of a game to me. He remembered the rush to the air raid shelters more as, like, an exciting routine than something truly frightening.
And he had a close relationship with his younger sister, Linda. But the foundational relationship for his future, and this is a real testament to his lifelong loyalty, was meeting his next-door neighbor in 1946.
A boy named Dave Green.
Yeah, they were 5 years old, and they became inseparable friends for the next 60-plus years.
And this friendship, this was the catalyst for his entire musical journey. Green, who eventually became a really prominent jazz bass player, was his first musical partner.
So it all starts right there.
It does.
Yeah.
And Green noted that their early musical exposure came from 78 RPM records, which were expensive back then. It was a serious commitment to buy music.
Right, and Green recalled that Watts was, quote, ahead of me in listening and acquisitions. He was serious about it from the very beginning.
And what were they listening to?
Not the pop hits of the day, that's for sure.
No, this was a serious education in classic jazz. They were devouring records by giants like Jelly Roll Morton.
The foundational figure of early jazz.
And Charlie Parker, the architect of bebop and the genius Thelonious Monk.
Just think about that for a second. As teenagers in post-war London, their musical foundation is rooted in this complex, intellectual, technically demanding American jazz.
That was his education. Not simple rock and roll, but sophisticated improvisation.
Okay, so here's where his creativity and his, graphic artist's eye for detail just perfectly intersect with his passion for rhythm. He got interested in drumming around age 13.
But he didn't start with a drum kit. He started with a banjo.
Which is the single most telling anecdote about Charlie Watts's mindset.
It really is. He bought a banjo, but he had an aesthetic objection to it. He didn't like the neck dots, those little inlays that mark the frets.
That is so specific, a fastidious, almost artistic detail.
So what does he do? He just takes the neck off and uses the circular wooden rim with its skin and puts it on a stand.
But why? Why that specific makeshift instrument?
Because he wasn't trying to just hit something. He was trying to emulate the subtle, textural brush style of the great jazz drummer Chico Hamilton.
Who was famous for a light touch, right? Texture over volume.
Exactly. Watts was literally building his own instrument to achieve a specific, subtle, sophisticated jazz sound, the brush sound, which demands immense control and nuance.
And that's the complete opposite of the loud, driving beat that rock and roll requires.
That distinction, aiming for sophistication and texture over volume, that's essential to understanding him. It wasn't until Christmas of 1955 that he got a proper, though pretty cheap, 12-pound drum kit.
But because he'd already developed this focused, disciplined practice routine with his jazz records, he carried that self-directed foundation into everything.
And that discipline, it extended right into his non-musical career. He showed talent in music, of course, but also in art, cricket, and football at school.
And then he committed to serious art training. He went to Harrow Art School until 1960 and trained as a graphic artist.
Which is a profession that requires meticulous attention to layout, balance, detail, all the things we see in his drumming.
And this wasn't just a hobby, it was a career. He worked professionally as a graphic designer for Charlie Daniel Studios and then for another agency, Charles Hobson and Gray.
Crucially, he kept this secure salary job, even as he started playing music in the, notoriously unstable club circuit.
That financial and artistic stability, it deeply influenced all his future decisions. He started his musical career with his childhood friend Dave Green in the Joe Jones All-Stars.
Playing the jazz he loved. But this scene was changing. He met Alexis Korner, who was this seminal figure in the British blues movement, and Korner invited him to join his group, Blues Incorporated, in 1962.
And the sources have this brilliant anecdote about that transition to R&B. Watts was actually on his way to a graphic design job in Denmark when he accepted Korner's offer.
Yeah, and he came back to London in February 1962 to play rhythm and blues, a genre he found utterly puzzling.
Puzzling.
Yes. He famously said he initially thought rhythm and blues meant Charlie Parker played slow.
That quote is just a perfect window into his mind at the time. His entire frame of reference was the rapid-fire, complex improvisational structure of bebop.
So the repetitive, primal 12-bar structure of blues and R&B, to him it just felt like a diluted, slow version of the serious music he knew.
He wasn't naturally drawn to it. He had to learn it, integrate it, and eventually blend that elegance of jazz into the guttural thump of rock.
So he's playing with Alexis Korner, still balancing music with his advertising job, and he starts frequenting the London R&B clubs.
And that's where he meets the early lineup of the Rolling Stones, Jagger, Richards, Brian Jones, Ian Stewart in mid-1962.
And they clearly recognize his skill, but he didn't, rush to join them.
No, and this brings us to one of the most important aha moments about Watts's priorities. He finally agreed to join the Rolling Stones in January 1963, but only after repeatedly refusing.
And why?
Because the band couldn't afford to pay him a regular wage.
He was earning a reliable professional salary from his graphic design work and his established jazz gigs. It's incredible.
He wasn't chasing rock stardom. He was chasing financial stability and, artistic commitment. The Stones were just too much of an unstable financial risk at first.
It is the ultimate sign of the anti-rock star. He demanded his professional fee before committing to a life of legendary chaos.
But once he committed, he was locked in. His first official public appearance as a permanent member was at the Ealing Jazz Club, February 2nd, 1963.
And from that point on, he became the absolute definition of reliability.
58 years. Until his death in 2021, he was the essential constant. He, Jagger, and Richards are the only members of the Stones to have performed on every single studio album.
Everyone.
To put that into perspective, he had never missed a single concert in his entire career with the band until his final planned absence in August 2021.
That level of dedication and reliability is just. It's unparalleled in a field that is defined by volatility.
And yet he remained this kind of elusive figure, shielded from the spectacle.
Well, even the famously reserved Watts couldn't escape a playful nickname. Jagger often introduced him live as the Wembley Whammer.
A nod to his working class roots in Wembley. I love that.
Yeah.
What's so fascinating to me is how his pre-Stones career shaped the Stones' identity. We have to talk about his contribution that went way beyond the drum kit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
His graphic art background became integral to the band's visual brand and their commercial success.
This is critical to understanding his full role. He contributed graphic art and comic strips to early Stones records.
And most notably, he designed the stark, stylized record sleeve for the 1967 album Between the Buttons.
So he brought his professional art school training directly into the messy world of rock.
He wasn't just providing the rhythmic foundation. He was actively shaping their visual presentation and, maybe most importantly, their massive live spectacle.
Right. He and Jagger collaborated heavily on the stage designs for the major tours, and they approached them like architectural design projects.
Exactly. When you think of the Stones, you think of those elaborate, almost theatrical stage setups. Those were the visual identifiers that defined their global tours.
And Watts was one of the primary architects of those massive spectacles.
The lotus-shaped design of the 1975 Tour of the Americas, the industrial grandeur of the Steel Wheels Tour in the late 80s, the monumental scale of Bridges to Babylon.
He approached the stage like a complex, three-dimensional graphic design project, applying balance, scale, composition.
And this graphic design influence also led to one of the most memorable tour announcements in rock history.
It perfectly illustrates how he bridged his sophisticated understanding of tradition with pure rock flash.
We're talking about the 1975 tour announcement in New York City, instead of, a boring indoor press conference.
The band completely surprised the reporters by driving a flatbed truck through Manhattan traffic, performing an impromptu version of Brown Sugar on the back.
It was outrageous, attention-grabbing, and just logistically insane.
And the genius of that move came entirely from Charlie Watts's jazz background.
Precisely. It was his idea, and he got it from his deep knowledge of early American jazz history. He remembered that this was a common old-school way for New Orleans jazz bands to promote gigs.
They'd load up a truck and play while driving through the streets.
Exactly. So Watts took this elegant, vintage promotional method and scaled it up for rock stadium-level shock value. It was high-concept advertising executed with total rock and roll disregard for traffic laws.
It's brilliant. It just shows his mind was constantly synthesizing history and application. He was a true dual role figure.
He was. And just to bring us into the present, his rhythm literally endures.
It does. The Stones released Hackney Diamonds in 2023, 2 years after he passed.
And the album features 2 songs with Watts on drums, Mess It Up and Live by the Sword. They had to carefully select archive recordings to make sure his specific, unique sound remains part of their legacy.
Now we really need to spend some time on Watts's personal life because it stands in such stark, almost humorous contrast to that prevailing rock star stereotype.
And this contrast, it fundamentally defined his image as the elegant constant.
Let's start with his devotion to his wife. This is arguably the most radical act of his entire career. He met Shirley Ann Shepard before he even joined the Stones.
And they married in 1964, right when the band was just exploding into global fame.
They remained married for 57 years, until his death.
57 years of marriage in an industry where relationships are measured in months, sometimes weeks. They had one daughter, Serafina, born in '68, and a granddaughter, Charlotte.
And Watts's loyalty to Shirley was legendary. It was absolute. The sources are explicit that he consistently refused sexual offers from groupies on the road.
Which was just utterly contrary to the expected and accepted lifestyle of his bandmates and peers.
That loyalty isn't just a nice footnote. It's part of his whole persona of control and restraint. He was the calm, amused counterpoint on stage, the visual manifestation of discipline amidst the chaos.
And he actively rejected the rock star label. He was quoted saying, with his characteristic understatement, "I've never filled the stereotype of the rock star."
That quote is the ultimate key. His rejection of the culture wasn't just modesty, it was an active choice.
There's that famous anecdote from the notorious 1972 American tour, the one defined by excess and wild partying.
Right.
When the band was invited to the Playboy Mansion, the others were, let's just say, fully engaging with the atmosphere.
But Watts, according to multiple accounts, ignored the women entirely and went straight to Hugh Hefner's game room.
He found pinball, or a pool table, more engaging than the expected, almost obligatory hedonism. It just speaks volumes about his priorities.
He didn't even have the patience for the minor aesthetic trappings of rebellion.
Not at all. He and Bill Wyman reportedly tried to grow beards in the 70s, which is, rock and roll 101, right?
Right.
And Watts recalled that the effort of maintaining them and the whole attempt to look appropriately disheveled just, quote, left us exhausted.
They couldn't even manage the simple act of growing facial hair without it feeling like an insurmountable burden.
Yet, despite this reluctance to embrace the mess of rock and roll, he was the definition of style.
He was named one of the world's best-dressed men by the Daily Telegraph, inducted into the International Best Dressed Hall of Fame by Vanity Fair in 2006.
Always in impeccably tailored suits, often three-piece, pristine ties, freshly shined shoes.
It's not just a style choice, it's a philosophical stance. The suit provided a visual contrast, but it also mirrored his drumming.
That's a great point. Everything was perfectly tailored, perfectly placed, and never excessive. He was the visual order anchoring the musical mayhem.
He was also the ultimate observer and quiet collector. He wasn't spending his money on giant yachts and mansions in the usual way.
No, he owned an Arabian horse stud farm in North Devon, which reflects a love of refinement and beauty. He collected cricket memorabilia.
And, maybe most famously, he collected cars, viewing them as beautiful objects.
But he never learned to drive and never held a driving license.
It's the perfect paradox. He appreciated the aesthetic and the engineering, the design excellence, but had no interest in the practical function or the freedom they represented.
A connoisseur of things he would never use.
Okay, now, here is the most fascinating detail for me. The one that truly speaks to the disciplined, almost obsessive nature he inherited from his graphic design training.
The sketch.
The bed sketches. In a 1996 interview, he said he had meticulously sketched every single bed he had slept on while on tour since 1967.
And by 2001, he had filled 12 to 15 diaries entirely with these detailed sketches of hotel room furniture.
Can you just imagine the sheer level of dedication that required? The band is living this chaotic, transient, hedonistic life.
And Watts is upstairs after every gig, meticulously documenting the headboard, the frame, the layout.
It's almost a form of silent, intellectual rebellion against the spectacle. He was visually cataloging his isolation.
Or maybe just imposing aesthetic order on the constant disarray of life on the road.
Yeah.
It's the mind of an archivist, an artist, and a disciplined worker all rolled into one.
And speaking of chaos, this meticulously controlled life, as disciplined as it was, wasn't unbreakable. We have to discuss the mid-1980s incident that gave us the most famous Charlie Watts quote. Precisely because it was such an aberration. This is the legendary "You're My F Singer" moment.
This happened in the mid-'80s, a difficult period for the band, a lot of personal friction. An intoxicated Mick Jagger called Watts' hotel room in the middle of the night,
Demanding, "Where's my drummer?"
And Watts' reaction is legendary because of its absolute devotion to his own code. He didn't just stumble downstairs.
No, he got up, he meticulously shaved, dressed in a full, perfectly tailored suit, put on a tie, and polished his shoes.
Then he calmly walked downstairs, confronted Jagger, and punched him squarely in the face. And then delivered the line, "Never call me your drummer again, you're my free singer."
The act wasn't just drunken rage. It was a powerful, symbolic act of defining the hierarchy based on mutual professional respect.
He was insisting on being treated as an equal, vital partner. The fact that he dressed impeccably before the punch, it elevates it from a bar fight to a principled, sartorial declaration of independence.
But let's interrogate this because the sources allow us to. If this moment is so central to the legend, does the fact that he was struggling with his own vices at the time diminish its significance?
That's a crucial question, and Watts himself answered it later. He expressed deep regret for the incident in 2003.
He attributed the behavior to his own excessive use of alcohol and drugs during that period.
A phase he candidly called a midlife crisis that nearly cost him his wife. So while the quote is definitive, the context for the action was rooted in a loss of control, an aberration from his true, disciplined self. He regretted the lack of control, even if the resulting quote was perfectly on brand.
Let's transition now to the core of his contribution, the drumming itself. As we've established, his philosophy was all about restraint. He was highly song-oriented,
He was explicitly not interested in drawing attention to himself with solos.
which often led him to be called underrated. But was he truly underrated, or was he just misunderstood?
He was misunderstood. Absolutely.
So-
He wasn't underrated by other musicians. He was underrated by the public, who equate drumming genius with showmanship and speed. His genius was subtle.
And here is where the Stones Foundation differs from nearly every other major rock band.
Watts didn't lead the rhythm section. He followed Keith Richards' riff.
That's a fascinating inversion of the standard rock paradigm. Usually the drummer sets the tempo and the groove and everyone else locks in.
Exactly. The New York Times critic Michiko Kakutani famously noted that this unique dynamic Watts following Richards is what makes the Stones impossible to copy.
So their foundation wasn't a standard rigid beat, it was a fluid conversational rhythm.
Right. Richards would throw out a riff, and Watts would respond to it, creating this push-pull tension that gave the songs their swaggering, slightly drunken feel. It's what made the whole machine sound like it might derail at any moment, yet it never did.
Okay, let's talk technical specifics because this is the core nugget for listeners who want to understand how he did it.
The first major technical innovation started around 1969. So imagine a standard rock beat. The hi-hat cymbal plays constant eighth notes, a steady chick, 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 chick.
Especially on beats 2 and 4, the crucial backbeat where the snare hits.
Right. Watts began deliberately omitting those hi-hat cymbal eighth notes on beats 2 and 4.
So he took sound out where everyone else put it in, at
Yeah.
the point of maximum emphasis. Why? What effect did that have?
A massive musical and physical impact. Physically, it reduces workload, which helped his longevity, but musically, and way more important, it increased the prominence of the snare drum backbeat.
So,
By removing the shimmering sound of the hi-hat, at the same moment the snare drum cracked, the snare hit felt drier, heavier, more foundational. It created sonic space around the most important beat in rock and roll.
that's the genius of economy, doing less to achieve more. Now, the second innovation is even subtler, the famous late backbeat.
This technique was particularly prevalent from about 68 through the mid-70s, the Stones' creative peak. Watts would intentionally, slightly, delay the snare drum hit on the second and fourth beats.
This isn't just dragging the tempo, which would sound sloppy.
No, it's a deliberate, minuscule hesitation. A pocket he put the beat into.
How do we explain that difference between being slow and being coolly delayed?
Think of it this way. Dragging is when you've missed the train. Deliberate delay is when you're leaning against the doorway, knowing the train can't leave without you.
Okay, I like that.
Watts's delay gives the rhythm a specific elasticity, a laid-back, almost swaggering feel. It's what jazz musicians call playing behind the beat.
And we can hear this distinct rubbery sound in absolute classics.
Oh yeah. Think of the feel of Monkey Man, the languid pace of Wild Horses, the distinctive drag on Sister Morphine, and of course the whole foundation of Let It Bleed.
That feeling of the song almost stumbling backwards slightly before catching itself. That's Watts's signature genius.
It is, though it's important to note that specific micro-timing became less pronounced in the studio after the mid-70s as production tightened up. But the elastic feel was always there live.
He also had this reputation for tempo variability, which must have driven engineers crazy.
Huh, probably. But it contributes to the dynamism. He wasn't afraid to let the song breathe. He'd sometimes significantly accelerate the tempo over the course of a track.
Honky Tonk Women is the famous example, right?
The perfect one. The tempo gradually pushes forward, adding this dynamic, almost frantic energy, pulling the whole song forward. It adds a sense of urgency a click track could never replicate.
And his equipment also speaks to his simplicity. He used Ludwig early on, but he made a key switch later.
Yeah, to a Gretsch round badge set in '68. But the most iconic set, the one he used from 1978 onward, was a late 50s Gretsch Natural Maple kit.
And his setup was always minimalist and visually elegant.
A 22-inch bass drum, a hanging 12-inch rack tom on its own stand knot mounted on the bass drum, a 16-inch floor tom, snare, hi-hat, and 4 cymbals. Minimalist, elegant, perfectly placed, just like his suits.
And beyond the Stones, we cannot overstate this. His heart never, ever left jazz. He was constantly involved in side projects.
He was a patron of jazz. Very early on, in 1964, he published a beautiful cartoon tribute to Charlie Parker called Ode to a High-Flying Bird.
Already blending his two primary talents, art and jazz.
He didn't stop there. In the late 70s, he joined the Boogie Woogie band Rocket 88 with Ian Stewart and Jack Bruce.
And that led to his most ambitious side project in the 80s.
The Charlie Watts Orchestra. This wasn't a small combo, this was a full, serious big band. They toured worldwide, playing complex arrangements, and featured huge names like Courtney Pine and Evan Parker.
He wasn't just dabbling. He was commissioning, leading, and funding serious high-level jazz while simultaneously touring stadiums with the Stones.
He then organized the Charlie Watts Quintet in '91, again as a tribute to Charlie Parker, releasing albums like Warm and Tender.
And then, in the year 2000, he did the utterly unexpected.
He released a techno-instrumental album, the Charlie Watts Jim Keltner Project. The tracks were named after jazz greats like Elvin Jones and Max Roach.
But he insisted they weren't copying their styles.
No, he said they were translating the feeling and emotional architecture of jazz into a completely modern electronic idiom.
That's a musical explorer right there. And then later he returned to his roots, recording Watts at Scott's at the iconic London Jazz Club.
And tying back to the very start of his life, his ultimate loyalty was reaffirmed in 2009. When he joined the ABC&D of Boogie Woogie Ensemble, his non-negotiable demand was that his childhood friend, Dave Green, play bass.
After more than 60 years from the prefab house in Wembley, he was still prioritizing playing with his very first bandmate.
It just speaks volumes about the value he placed on personal history and loyalty.
His impact is undeniable. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in '89.
And didn't even attend the ceremony, which is peak Charlie Watts.
It is. But critics understood him. The Guardian in '91 called him an heroic yet quaint archetype, attributing his survival to the fact that he never chased stardom or tried to force himself into songwriting.
Robert Christgau simply called him rock's greatest drummer. His complexity lies in that absolute restraint. He achieved greatness not through explosion, but by anchoring the storm.
We've touched on his single period of serious personal turbulence in the mid-'80s, which he later discussed with remarkable candor.
Yes, that period between '83 and '86 was a massive detour for such a disciplined man. He battled excessive alcohol and drug use, calling it his midlife crisis.
He said he became totally another person during that time, noting, "I nearly lost my wife and everything over my behavior."
The fact that he framed his addiction as an aberration that threatened the foundation of his stable life shows how seriously he took his self-control. He was dedicated to sobriety and discipline afterward.
And he quit smoking in the late '80s.
Mm-hmm.
Then, in 2004, came the serious physical scare, a diagnosis of throat cancer. He underwent radiotherapy and achieved remission.
And his recovery led to this really profound observation about his relationship with the band and the touring life.
Right. After treatment, he immediately embarked on the 2-year A Bigger Bang tour, and he linked periods of rest to illness.
He famously said, "It seems that whenever we stop, I get ill, so maybe I should carry on." For Watts, the energy and commitment of playing, the rhythm of the road, was perhaps literally keeping him alive.
Then, in August 2021, the Stones were preparing for the resumption of the U.S. No Filter tour. Watts had heart surgery.
And for the first time in his entire career, elected to sit out the tour to recover, with Steve Jordan replacing him temporarily.
It was a shocking moment for fans because he was the one constant, the one immovable figure.
Sadly, not long after, on August 24, 2021, Charlie Watts died at the age of 80 from squamous cell carcinoma at a hospital in London, surrounded by his family.
And in classic Watts fashion, he was buried in Devon after a small, modest, quiet ceremony. Perfectly fitting for a man who avoided grand gestures his entire life.
His wife, Shirley, passed away the following year in 2022.
The tributes just poured in, solidifying his status as a drumming giant. He was voted into the Modern Drummer Hall of Fame in 2006.
And his peers, they really understood his unique role. Paul McCartney offered a heartfelt tribute saying, "I've always loved you." Ringo Starr called him beautiful. Elton John, Pete Townsend.
The most telling tribute, maybe, came from Pink Floyd's Nick Mason, who called him possibly the most underrated of the great rock and roll drummers.
Which reinforces that idea that his commitment to restraint over flamboyance meant his genius was often missed by the casual listener.
The band's own tribute was so poignant. For 10 days after his death, the Rolling Stones' official website replaced its entire contents with just a single, powerful picture of Charlie Watts.
And they shared a fantastic video tribute set to their 1974 track, If You Can't Rock Me.
A song which opens with those great self-referential lines. The band's on stage and it's one of those nights the drummer thinks that he's dynamite. Oh yeah.
It was a classic understated nod to the essential engine of the band, celebrating the man who provided the dynamite without ever thinking of himself as the explosion.
And finally, even his posthumous digital legacy speaks to his quiet, analog nature.
When his estate launched official social media accounts on what would have been his 82nd birthday, the statement noted that Charlie was too modest to embrace social media in his lifetime. The ultimate anti-rock star remained offline.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've traced Charlie Watts' trajectory from the post-war London Art School graduate, the graphic designer, the jazz purist, who reluctantly served as the rhythmic backbone of rock's longest-running, most chaotic machine.
His greatness was built on intellectual discipline. His ability to synthesize those complex timing techniques, the late backbeat that gave the Stones their swagger, the hi-hat omissions that made the backbeat punchier. It made him technically superb yet resolutely unfashionable.
He imposed order and elegance on an inherently wild medium.
He was the ballast against the wind, the impeccably tailored anchor that allowed the frontmen to drift into legendary chaos.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought about the non-musical, highly intellectual artifacts that emerged from his estate after his passing. This really speaks to the man behind the drums.
We've established that he was a collector, a lover of refinement, the tailored suits, the antique drum kits, the Arabian horses.
But his private collection outside of music speaks volumes about his hidden curiosity and intellectual rigor.
In 2023, his extraordinary private book collection was put up for auction. The headline item wasn't about music or fashion. It was a pristine, signed first edition of F. Scott Fitzgerald's modernist masterpiece, The Great Gatsby.
Expected to fetch up to £300,000.
And even more surprisingly, in 2024, the Bayeux Museum in France acquired a life-size, 230-foot-long replica of the Bayeux Tapestry from his estate.
Just think about that profound intellectual disconnect. A man who defined his life by the fleeting, moment-to-moment improvisation of rhythm.
The drummer, who anchored the greatest rock band in history, was secretly collecting ultra-rare literary first editions and historical artifacts documenting the Norman conquest of England, the very foundation of British history and narrative.
So for a man who dedicated his public life to transient sonic chaos, what profound understanding of history, structure, permanence, and narrative was Charlie Watts searching for in classic literature and ancient tapestries that he couldn't satisfy in 57 years on the road?
He brought order to the chaos of rock and roll, but in his private life, he was obsessed with the order of history, the permanence of great art, and the perfect structure of a finished narrative.
It's a mystery fitting for the elegant constant. That's a deep dive for you to mull over. Thank you for joining us.